Good afternoon. Welcome to Don't Be a Commodity, dealing with RFPs. We've got an exciting topic today. This is something I really enjoy talking about, and I've enjoyed giving this presentation before, but it's constantly updated. So if you've sat through it before, guess what? There's new, better stuff in it. But first of all, before we get going, I'd like to thank our sponsor, and our sponsors are what make these webinars possible. Today's sponsor is DoveNet, who has the project system. So this is probably, DoveNet was a pioneer in creating enterprise software for the integrated services business. This is an all-in-one sales and project management system for getting your integrated projects done. And they also have the very cool TPS mobile app, which allows you to do service tickets and simple quotes on your mobile device to make things ready for billing. So it's a great way to look at your job while you're out in the field talking to the customer, help your technicians post hours into the project management system, which tracks all of your purchase orders, billing, project management time, links it to your accounting so that you have a clear picture of the value of your job all the way through the project. It's a great system. I really do appreciate the fact that my friend Tony Nasca is sponsoring this webinar, and I hope that you guys will take a look at their product. I am Tom Stimson, president of the Stimson Group. As most of you know, I've been around for a long time. I've been involved with Infocom. I've been on Infocom adjunct faculty for about 10 years. So I have a lot of teaching experience. I'm a past president of Infocom as well, and I'm involved in Plaza and several other organizations. So thank you for joining me. Now, let's get right down to our topic. Like I said, this is a good one. Here's our basic problem. You have formal RFPs coming at you on a daily basis, and they are designed to create a negotiating barrier between you and the buyer. They're designed by the buyer to better protect their interests. What the buyer is thinking is that they're going to level the field to create a competitive advantage. Okay? That's what the RFP is all about. There are also informal RFPs, and we're going to address both because an RFP is an RFP. It doesn't matter how it comes to you. Informal RFPs also create a barrier to relationships. So when you have a conversation with a customer about a project and they tell you what it is that they're looking for, they're trying to preempt a relationship conversation and trying to mitigate extra engagement into the project. They're trying to protect their time. And if they can give you a few things to go work on, you'll go away and leave them alone. What these informal RFPs do is weed out the uncreative thinkers. So we're going to look at how we can be a more creative thinker, how we can respond more intelligently to RFPs. The solution that we're going to apply is a very simple 3-step process. We can always remember 3 steps. And we're going to apply it to every project opportunity. Whether it was an RFP that was written on a napkin at a cocktail party, or it was a formal 20-page thing that came through a public bid. We're also going to talk about the 4 different types of RFPs, and all of this is to set us up to prepare for better negotiation. And guess what next month's webinar is about? That's right, negotiation, and I'll remind you about that again at the end of this session. So what is a request for proposal? It's a project-based invitation to propose a solution, budget, and/or your capability. An RFP can have any level of detail. They don't have to be formal. They can be formal or informal. And remember, they represent the customer asserting control. RFPs are not the only way you acquire business, but they're probably the most frequently mismanaged opportunity that we have. So we're going to focus a lot on just the RFP side of your business where somebody presents an opportunity and you respond to it. The 3 steps, memorize these: qualify, position, close. And we're going to have a bonus concept. We're going to talk about what to do when all else fails. Because as you're going through this, you're going to go, well, Tom, what if I can't get the client to qualify, position, or close, but I really want to respond to the RFP because we think it's strategically important? I'll answer that question as well. Now let's agree on a few things. First of all, as we enter into this whole discussion about responding to RFPs, let's agree that profit is more important than revenue. There was a time for those of us who are over 50 when all revenue equaled profit. I think we can safely say that today, particularly in our new economy post-recession, that not all revenue has profit. We also have to agree that clients are more important than jobs. So if the discussion around your office and around the sales table is we need this job, what we need to focus on more is the actual customer. We need this customer. Bidding on jobs that you cannot win is a waste of resources. Quoting is not free. It uses up valuable capacity in your organization. If you're a production rental company and you use production managers who build the quotes and go out and do the job as your customer interface, then bidding on a job is extremely expensive because that production manager is worth about $150 an hour to quote on jobs. And if they're quoting on a job, they're not taking care of the customers that are in place. Likewise, if they're taking care of the customers that are in place, they're not quoting on jobs. So you have a resource management issue from the get-go. Integration, if we're tying up our design team or an audio-visual engineer of some sort or senior project managers in order to quote a job, we're also tying up extremely valuable resources. And it's probably 3 times more costly to quote an integration job, particularly a design build job, than it is to quote a rental production job. The third thing we need to agree on is that buyers that don't take the time to get to know you probably aren't going to hire you unless it's on price. If they don't take the time to get to know you, they're probably only going to buy on price or not at all. Finally, intentional growth and intentional profit is a far better goal than the happy accident of guessing the right number and winning a job. So if you're focused on intentional growth in 2015 and intentional profit that goes with it, then responding to RFPs in a qualified position and close methodology should fit nicely into your business development, sales, and marketing plan. Let's look at a statistic. This comes from the executive board, which does some great market research on sales. And they have a statistic on their website that 50% of the decision is made before a B2B buyer contacts you. In other words, when a potential buyer or somebody with an RFP reaches out to you as opposed to you discovering them, they've probably looked at your website, they're reacting to a reference or a referral that somebody else made, or maybe you just had a business card sitting on their desk. But at any rate, they've done a certain amount of due diligence before they contacted you. And in the course of that due diligence, if they've picked out 5 suppliers they're going to send an RFP to, they probably have decided who they would buy if they had no other information. So company A is somebody we think we would do business with. Their website says all the right things, and company B looks okay, and C, D, and E all say they do the same thing, so I'm going to send them an RFP too. My point is, when you get an RFP, your job is to make sure that that buying decision improves and that the customer continues the due diligence to 100% complete decision with you as the decidee. So know that they've already made a huge amount of their decision and they're waiting for somebody to either affirm the decision they've already made or change their mind. So let's talk about the 3 steps. The first step is qualifying. This is what it looks like. When an RFP comes in, no matter how it comes to you, it could be a phone call. If you're old like me, it may have come in on a fax machine. It comes in by email. It comes through your website. Right? Maybe it's a service that you subscribe to. However you get this, the first question you have to ask yourself is, do I know this customer? And if the answer is no, then pick up the phone and call the customer. Why do I need to pick up the phone? And all the millennials are going, what? What? Can't I just text them? No, you have to pick up the phone. Conversation is a huge part of this. We need to have a conversation, and I'll show you how that works. And if you do know the customer, then pick up the phone. Either way, call the customer. Call them quickly. Call them right away. Call them the minute after you receive it. Even if all you do is you leave a message, that's going to set things off in the right tone. And why are you calling them? Well, you need to have a conversation. That's why. You want to find some things out. And you can ask them through a script, or you can ask them informally if you know them well. But really what you want to know is, why did you get sent the RFP? You also would like to know, why is this in an RFP format? What's the client's thinking? What's the thing they're trying to gain or avoid by using an RFP process? Ask them a little bit about the criteria. What's the thinking or the motivation behind the criteria? Who helped them develop it? But the most important question, and if you only ask one question, ask, help me understand how my quote is going to help you make the decision about this project. And if they can tell you why your quote's important, it will help you understand whether or not you're a good fit or a bad fit. And if the reason that you're on the quote list is they want to make sure that somebody else is doing their job for another supplier, you might be a bad fit. If the reason you're getting the RFP is they're trying to find the lowest price and they heard you were cheap and you don't think you're cheap, then maybe it's a bad fit. But chances are there's a perfectly good reason that you can work with about why your quote is going to help them make their decision. And a request for proposal is asking for more information to help them make their decision. If we decide that this is a good fit, if we pass the qualifying filter, then the next step in the way we complete the qualifying stage is to extend an invitation. An invitation to what? Well, we'll talk about that. So qualifying, are we a good fit? Is this a suitable contact for this project? You may not ask that question, but you have to ascertain the answer to it. Is the job winnable? Here's where you need to be honest with yourself. Are they buying what you are selling? Is this going to work out? Do they understand what you do and what you do well and what makes you valuable? Is the job winnable? Ask yourself, is the RFP intended to help me or deter me? And I find that many RFPs are written as deterrents, and we'll talk about the different kinds of proposal RFPs later. And another question that's very important to you is, will we have an opportunity to negotiate? If the RFP is written in such a way that you have to submit, you submit blindly, you can get your questions answered, but you have to submit, and that they're going to award the job and then start talking about the changes, which is very typical in integration. The question is, am I going to have an opportunity to negotiate, or am I having to commit to a price and a profit margin with minimal information? And after you've done all these things and you've had this internal dialogue, ask yourself again, are we still a good fit? So if you get through all of this and the customer reaffirms why you're involved and you can internalize why you're involved, and we want to extend the invitation, what's an invitation? Well, an invitation is how we turn the tables on the customer that's generating the RFP. An invitation represents you taking control of the situation. The client starts with control by giving you an RFP in the first place, and good for them for doing that. That's in their best interest. What's in your best interest is try to redirect the customer's energy towards more due diligence. An invitation could be providing them access to your technical or creative team, particularly popular in live events, or maybe to your design team in integration. It's an invitation for them to visit your office, deliver a brief capabilities pitch, maybe check out some technologies that apply to their project, give them some A/B choices. Maybe you take them to a project for a site visit. Or maybe you just have a web meeting. The best scenario is to get them to your office, get them across your threshold so they can see who you are and how you work, get them on your turf. Getting the customer on your turf gives you a little bit of control and helps validate who you are. very often I find that customers look at you just through your website, and sometimes our websites aren't very good, but our offices and our people are great. So let's get them to our office. And if your office isn't great, get a better office, because this is very key to growing intentionally your business. Get people to your office, let them see how you work, who you are, and that you're going to be a good partner for them. So we've qualified a customer fairly quickly. And if you're worried about how long this takes, Tom, that's a long process. Sometimes this process just takes a few moments. It's a couple of minute conversation. Sometimes you already know the customer, so qualifying happens very quick. But even though the timeline might be compressed, you're still going through all the same line of questioning. Just sometimes it takes longer than it does others. Now, positioning, if qualifying is helping make sure that we are a potentially good fit and inviting the customer to do more due diligence, then positioning is giving them the due diligence to do. I call it meeting the customer in the right conversation. The conversation that we typically have is the RFI, which is the response to an RFP, request for information. I send you a list of questions about your RFP. In other words, give me more information. That's not the right conversation. That's still working in the customer's RFP world. It's not doing anything to help the customer learn more about you and put you in a better position. So we want to meet the customer in the right conversation. We want to pitch softly, generally, but we want to pitch our capabilities. Make sure they understand all the things that we do that might apply to a project like this. And it might include things that aren't even in the RFP. It's not a hard sell. It can often just be a conversation. And if you have a salesperson with a lot of finesse and a lot of nuance, they can do a very large pitch and just make it sound like a conversation. So it doesn't have to be an in-your-face, what we call a dog and pony show, where I'm blasting them with information, and all of a sudden it's like a Mad Men episode. It can just be a conversation where you find out that you have shared interests and how your history and experience dovetails into your customers' experiences. The product of the positioning, besides helping the customer see you in a different light and expand their understanding of your capabilities, is for you to refine the RFP so that you can so it will better take advantage of your capabilities. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but the goal is to find that thing in the RFP that needs to be changed so that you can have a conversation about it. We're going to wrap up the positioning by getting to an agreement on this revised scope of work. So here's what this all looks like. We've extended the invitation. Sometimes the answer is no. The client says, no, I can't do that. No, that doesn't fit my time frame. No, it's not important to me. That just means they just disqualified themselves from the conversation. And most of the time that means that we probably don't bid on this project, but that doesn't mean that we're done. It doesn't mean that we're kicking them to the curb. It just means that the timing and sequence wasn't correct. And if you treat sales like a marathon instead of a sprint, we're going to look at this no as an opportunity to make an invitation for later. In production rental, what this often looks like is we're not the right company. We're not going to bid on this particular show that you have coming up. And I realize that you're very busy right now, but when that event's over, we'd love to meet with you again in the right conversation and talk about future projects when you have more time. Rather than run the risk of losing any opportunity in the future by doing a bad proposal based on with the client not knowing enough about you and losing the chance to work with them again, it's better to withhold your proposal and work on getting the better meeting. But if you can get a yes, and frankly, most of the time you'll get some sort of a yes, even if it's only for a WebEx, you're going to have that meeting. And in that meeting, you're going to have your pitch, whatever that looks like, and you're going to talk about the project. And you're going to talk about the project with the goal of refining the project, finding something that needs to be changed that will give you a competitive advantage. Sometimes you won't get there. Sometimes the customer will reject this. Sometimes the customer will say, well, it's been lovely meeting you and everything, but really, I just want you to bid on this project exactly like I've put it out. At which point you have to make a decision. Sometimes the decision is no. Sometimes we've just qualified. We just had to do a little bit more work to get the final qualification. But very often you'll find that customers are very agreeable to figuring out how to do it better. If in this meeting you are able to develop a relationship and develop a basis of trust, then they're more likely to agree to something. And I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to give you, it's kind of a historical example because it's 25 years ago, or at least it seems like it. Way back in the day when we were using CRT projectors, it was a common practice on high-end events that in order to improve the image of your broadcast video, to put it through a product that was known as a line doubler. This is a precursor to a scaler that we see today. And it took the NTSC video and it bumped it up to a higher scan rate and higher resolution by doing interpolation. And most of the big corporate events that did component video used line doublers. Well, the engineering team at my old company figured out that there was a better way to get a good image without using a line doubler. And it had to do with, instead of using component YRB video, using component RGB video. I don't want to bore you with the technology of all this, but that became the thing that was a competitive advantage for us, because we could have a conversation with the client who had line doublers for every screen on their event, which at the time often cost more than the projectors themselves. They were very expensive boxes, and say, you don't need those. You could remove those line doublers, save that money, because we do it this way, and we'd be happy to show you the difference between the line doubled image and the image that we provide without a line doubler, and you tell us which image you would rather have and pay for. It became a huge competitive advantage. That is a positioning conversation. That's a conversation where I've taken their RFP, I've refined the specification to give me a competitive advantage. Now, if I can get them to agree to that change, what are we actually agreeing to? The agreement outcome of a good positioning visit is that we're going to have a revised scope of work. We're going to take that original RFP and we're going to tweak it. It may be just changing a few line items. It may be major changes on it, but we're going to agree on what the new version of the project is. We're also going to have a much clearer understanding of what the fit and finish of the job is. This has to do with a lot of what's really important to the customer. Where are they willing to cut corners and where are they not willing to compromise? And it's hard to put those things into an RFP. We're also going to have a qualified budget or range. And I've noticed over the past few years that more and more sales teams in general, individuals, are getting better about asking for the budget. But we're not necessarily better about getting a budget answer out of the customer. And there are some better techniques for getting budgets or getting budget ranges from the customer so that we have something to agree to. So in a positioning conversation, we're hopefully going to get to some sort of a not to exceed budget based on this scope of work with this fundamental change that we're introducing, which, oh, by the way, is a competitive advantage for us. And we're going to address the fit and finish issues of this particular customer. You cannot do any of these things without having a conversation. These are not things that we're going to get out of an RFP. Now, you're also agreeing that you can now create a proposal. And what this proposal can become, in many cases, is instead of a proposal, it becomes an agreement. Because if we're really developing the trust and we've positioned ourselves really well into this project and with this customer, and they're actually impressed with who we are, and they've done their due diligence, and they feel, no, this is probably who I would hire, you can change this conversation now that I have a scope, a fit and finish, and a qualified budget to say, if I can have the budget come in this range, will that meet your needs and can we confirm this job? In which case you're no longer writing a proposal, you're writing an agreement. So if possible, you are agreeing to do the job per the revised scope at the discussed price. Now, right now, you're all sitting around thinking of all the clients you could never, ever do this with, and that's okay. There are certain types of customers and certain kinds of RFPs where it's going to be very difficult to follow the qualified position and close. And the reason is those jobs aren't qualified. And if you do a better job of qualifying, you will find you will waste less time trying to position yourselves in front of people who don't want to do business with you. And isn't that the point of all this? So, quick conversation about fit and finish. Positioning is often about discovering the customer's tastes. This is why conversations and this is why being in person is important. This is why being able to show them some different products or solutions to find out. I was having a conversation with a coaching client earlier who was struggling with his sales team sometimes over specifying. And it's the difference between taking a simple boardroom setup and putting this huge Crestron system into it when all they really needed, all the customer really wanted, was an Apple TV and a Logitech programmable remote. You can make money off of either one of those jobs, but you will not make money if you sell the customer the wrong one or try to. So be prepared in your go-to-market strategy for your products and services to have multiple levels, ideally 3 levels of fit and finish that you can show good, clear trade-offs and value. In addition to failing to agree, we have to remember at this point in time, even though we've invested all this time and energy to take this qualified opportunity, have a positioning meeting, we put out cookies and coffee, and we did the dog and pony show, you can still say no. And it's okay to say no thank you at this point. Because sometimes the client's expectations are still not reasonable and can't fit into what it is that will give you a competitive advantage or even allow you to make money or look good. But what you can do is provide them something for free to help them out. I did this a lot as a rental salesperson. I would have folks call that were looking for something that was just not a good fit with my organization. Maybe it was a little bit too low end or a little bit too haphazard, or it just wasn't something I was going to make money on. What I would do for that client, rather than dismiss them, which is pretty uncool, is saying, look, I don't think we're the right organization for this. However, here's 3 companies that you might call, but let me help you rewrite your RFP so you ask for the right things to get what you're looking for out of the job. For instance, you're asking for this, but if you asked it this way, you'll actually get what you're looking for. So help them rewrite the RFP, send them off as a friend with a good reference, and you'll feel better about it. Okay? It's okay to say no, thank you. You don't have to propose unless you can influence the scope. Now, I realize sometimes you'll want to. And if you go to all the trouble of trying to position and find out there's nothing you can get the client to deviate from, you may still make the decision to write a proposal. However, you've given up a lot of leverage. Your expertise is no longer better than anybody else's. You weren't able to convince the client that there was a more worthwhile way to approach it. So if the client doesn't respect your expertise, that's where I draw the line. That's when I don't want to write a proposal. Okay? Maybe my expertise is adequate or more than adequate, but if I haven't done a good job of selling it, doing a job for them is probably not the best way to prove things out. Now, if the bidding criteria allows you no competitive advantage, I'm also more willing to walk away, because now you're risking commoditization. And there's 2 things I think that we don't want as business people, and it's much easier to talk about this in an up economy than it is in a down economy, is that we don't want to do a job that makes us look bad, and we don't want to do a job where we're treated like a commodity. And right now, I think in the current marketplace, we don't have to do either one, so we can afford to be a little bit more discerning and work on getting better margins with customers who will value us more because we did a better job of positioning than spending more time chasing low margin business for people who haven't taken the time, or we haven't put in the right effort to get them to appreciate us. Now, when does the proposal come in all of this? Well, let's think about what a proposal process looks like, a successful proposal process looks like in a positioning conversation. It starts with a scope of work. Ideally, as you revise the scope of work or the narrative, we want the client to agree to this before we go to pricing. Pricing comes last. We need to take a little bit extra time, regardless of how you do business. We all need to take better time of understanding the scope of work, getting the client and your team to agree on what the scope of work is in shared terminology, and then the pricing can come later. If all the customer wants from you, however, is a price, then you're probably wasting your time. Look, just put the proposal together for me. I just need to see what this thing's going to cost, see if this is something my boss even wants to do. You just wasted a lot of time. You need to take some case studies, show them a few pictures and saying, here's what a job like this costs, here's what a job that looks like this costs, give them a broad range, give them some information and send them back. The other thing that you can help customers or potential customers understand, and if you only take one thing away from this entire webinar, this is it. Here's your hidden nugget. Customers that provide you a maximum budget get more value. And you need to help them understand that. Think about it. If somebody comes to you and says, yes, we have this sales meeting, we want to do an award show, and we have $50,000. I have a not to exceed budget of $50,000. What can you do? Your job then is to give them the most bang for the buck, and you have nothing to negotiate in terms of price. What you have to negotiate with is how much value can you afford to put into it based on the timing and the technology and your understanding of the customer's ideas. Customers who give you a budget generally get better value because you're not guessing anymore. You're just finding what's the most I can give you. I can give you 4 moving lights, or I can give you 24 LED PARs. What can we do more with? Which is more important to this event? So customers that give you a max budget get more value. And the way you explain it, because when you ask a customer for a budget, say, well, can you tell me what your budget is? They say, no, we're not really sure. If they gave you an RFP, I'm telling you they are sure. They know exactly what their budget is. They don't want to share it. Because if they tell you it's $50,000 and you thought the job was $40,000, they believe you're going to charge them $50,000 for a $40,000 job. They don't trust you. So if they won't give you a budget, it's because you haven't developed trust, which is why they need to come meet you, which is why you have to have the positioning conversation so that you can say, let me help you understand how this works. If you have a budget and you give me a not to exceed budget, here's how I can do it. Here's all the things that I can put in there. If I have to guess at what your budget is, I have to hold things back. I have to give myself some wiggle room. I have to hedge. So do you want me to guess, or do you want to treat me like a partner? Now, that may not be the language that works for you, but it's probably the language I would use. So focus on the budget range and their must-haves. What are your must-haves? What are your must-not-haves? Your solutions have to connect back to the must-haves. Make your customers see how this important must-have is addressed by this thing in your scope of work. And also, don't be afraid to come in under budget. If they give you a $50,000 budget and you can do everything really well for $45,000, wouldn't that be a wonderful conversation to have? So we've qualified, we've positioned, we've agreed upon a new scope of work with a price, perhaps a not to exceed budget. Now we have to get to the closing part. Okay? I can now present price and terms. I can come back, this may be a formal agreement or maybe part of a conversation, but we're simply working towards a clear no or a yes. And there is no maybe. And we'll talk about the value of a maybe next week next month in the negotiation webinar. So Closing looks like this. We agree on the scope. If we don't agree, we can continue to revise it. We review it. If this is what we want, we move on. If it's not, we revise it again. So if we finally agreed on what the scope of work is, then I can actually create the proposal, which is more of the formal document, and hopefully it's just an agreement. Here's the agreement to do business. Here are the terms and conditions. Here's all the exclusions, all that normal contract stuff that we put in that we shouldn't introduce to our new relationship until we've agreed on what it is we want to do, because it tends to make the relationship a little bit too sanitary. Now that we've got the proposal with the price on it, hopefully it's everything that the customer wanted because we talked about it before we even wrote the silly thing. Is this what they wanted? Yeah, maybe it's not, then you negotiate. Sometimes customers, even though they trust you and you've got this great relationship and you play golf together and you give them that $50,000 budget to the scope of work that you agreed upon, will turn around and say, yeah, I just talked to procurement or talked to my boss and we really want to do this for 40. That's when you're negotiating. Negotiate, get to that yes, okay, and then you confirm the order. So we'll talk more about negotiation next month and how to deal with that what I call the crazy Ivan that the customer just pulled on you, or what to do and how to negotiate terms. But we'll get to that final price and confirm that order. So let me recap how we respond to an RFP, what the 3 steps are. We qualify, we're qualifying the job, we're qualifying the customer, and we're qualifying ourselves because sometimes we're not a good fit. When we're done qualifying, if we've passed all the tests, we're extending an invitation so that we can have a positioning conversation. So I can understand how my company, help the client understand how my company fits in, revise the scope, take control of the scope, agree to a new scope so that we can go through the closing process. And I'm going to match the budget and the scope, connect it back to the client's needs that I've learned in the positioning conversation. And we're going to negotiate terms, not price. Again, another preview of the negotiating webinar. Now, let's talk about types of RFPs. There are 4 basic types. There's non-bid RFPs, which is your client, somebody you've done business with before. No one else is going to bid. And in my forecast, I'm putting 80% value on that non-bid quote. Verification bids, it's the same client, but for whatever reason, they've had to put the job out to bid. My forecast had just dropped to 50%. A courtesy bid is when the client wants to validate somebody else's numbers. A courtesy bid is the other half of a verification bid. So if you're getting a verification bid from your regular client, everybody else who got that RFP is getting a courtesy bid. A blind bid is a third-party scope of work looking for the best price. This is the RFPs that are coming from your Dodge reports, from your public tender bids, or coming out of the blue from people that you don't know. We applied the qualify, position, and close to every one of these. We spend more time on some areas than others, but we have to do all of the steps. Let's start with the non-bid RFP. We already know this is your business to lose, so why am I going through all the trouble? Well, because you need to seek an acceptable solution and budget by mutual exploration of the issues, and you're still trying to protect your margin, okay? And really, you're involved to reassure the client and make sure that the relationship continues to go on. So the process, qualify. This is pretty darn quick. It's a regular client. You're done. So have a meeting. What am I going to do in that meeting? I don't need to have a meeting with these people. I already know them. Yeah, you do need to have the meeting because you need to do some demos. You need to do something with the scope to create more engagement for the customer and make sure that there's something that you're bringing to the table that's valuable. For instance, the client says, yes, we'd like to put a 360 video projection onto a globe that lowers itself into the audience. I think we need to have a meeting. But even if all they say is, well, we just want to do PowerPoint on a 9x12 screen, I might want to show them 2 different types of video projectors and make sure that we can get a fit and finish that's appropriate for this job. Okay? My positioning will lead us to a closing conversation. Great. Let's do it this way. If we can do this for Y, can I go ahead and confirm this job and start putting your crew on it? Okay. So the qualify, position, and close may go very quickly and easily, but you're still actually following all of the steps. In your proposal, because sooner or later you probably are writing one, you're working from a known budget because you've talked about it. Your best client should tell you what the budget is. You're working from known elements because you've changed them. And you can put in options into a non-bid proposal. Upgrades, variations, optional versions. You can put contingency money into a proposal that you're doing in a non-bid situation because it's just the two of you. So you can put money in there that will be taken out later or maybe get applied differently later, and you would never do these in any other kind of proposal. So non-bid proposals are unique. Verification bid proposals are a little bit different. You have to shift gears. You may be the incumbent, you may be the preferred provider, but there's other people involved. And any ideas that you have in a positioning conversation are going to get shared because the whole point of a verification bid is for everybody to be bidding on the same thing. And very often your buyer is going to work with the best first or second pass solution, which means you have a very high chance of actually losing the job. I actually lost my best client through a verification bid because I mishandled it. I had a great incumbent client. They changed the way that they needed to do jobs. They went from a quality focus, the sky's the limit mentality, to a bottom line driven mentality. And I just flat missed it because I didn't do the positioning phase. I got their RFP and I sent the same quote I always do with all the extra stuff in it. I didn't listen to the client. I lost the client, didn't get any of their business for 2 years. And then when I did get them back, I only got a small part of their business. So pay attention to verification bids. They're very dangerous. So you qualify. Hey, I understand why you put this out, that you needed to put this out the bid. Help me understand what's going on and how my being involved in the bidding process is going to help you. Position. Clarify your role. What is it you want us to do in this job? Do you want us to do like we normally do where we're the TD, or do you want us to do something different? What are you asking the other suppliers to do so I can fit into that same role? Okay. Revise the scope if you can. Bring good ideas to the table if you can, but understand that other people are going to get that same information and get the opportunity to revise it. In closing, well, it's going to be harder to close because they're going to wait for all the bids to come back in. They're going to go through this with everybody they've asked it. However, because you're in the incumbent, you can ask for a right of first refusal that says, would you at least give us the opportunity to respond to your best choice and let us revise and take a look at that? And most of the times your good clients will let you do that. So that's a right of first refusal that you can bank for later. So your proposal, don't do it like a non-bid. You're going to write a very tight scope of work. You're going to itemize all your value-added services. They need to be on the proposal so that the client can see that they're included. No contingency money, no options that are not part of the RFP. This is bare bones. And remember, that right of first refusal that you've negotiated, probably verbally, guarantees you a closing opportunity. Now, the courtesy bid, that's the other guy, the other half of a verification bid. I used to think that courtesy bids were horrible things to do, but now I'm looking at them as great marketing opportunities. So you're probably not as well known to the buyer, and certainly not as well known as the incumbent. And your proposal is probably there to help keep their preferred supplier honest. So in a lot of courtesy bids, the intent is not to change suppliers. The intent is to keep their original supplier, just keep them on better terms, or get them into line or get them under control, whatever the case may be. Process is the same: qualify, position, close. First thing you do in the qualification on a courtesy bid is make sure this isn't about price. Well, we just want to make sure that we're getting the best price for this. Ah, really? And tell me why that's important. Help me understand why. Price-driven courtesy bids generally fall with the incumbent because the incumbent's going to do everything they can to be the low bidder, including exercising their right of first refusal. So a price-driven courtesy bid is probably not in your best interest. However, a courtesy bid that's based on capabilities, you have a very high chance to win if you have the capabilities that are appropriate for the client or the job. So get that positioning conversation, make the invitation, do the pitch, work on changing the scope, be a great host, do all of those things, because your goal is to eliminate that first refusal position of the incumbent. And your closing has to do with, if we can do the job for this, are you prepared to make a decision, or do you need to take this back to your incumbent and see if they can up their game? So you need to have a clear understanding of how courtesy bids can turn out. Your proposal, if you follow all 3 steps and you actually write the proposal, it's just like a verification bid. You got a tight scope of work, itemize the value-added services, no contingency money. However, it's also very likely that in a courtesy bid situation, you should decline. And you probably would decline in the qualifying phase, because if you know who the incumbent is and know that the incumbent will do anything in their power to keep you from getting the job, why go through all the trouble and expense just to irritate them? Now, maybe that's part of your business plan. Maybe that's how you get your jollies. I've got better things to do with my time. Blind bids. Blind bid is the relationship or contact is typically indirect. You don't have access to a decision maker. It's designed to reduce costs or eliminate unqualified sellers or both. Okay? In a blind bid situation, you're trying to get access to an economic buyer or influencer, and chances are you're not going to be able to, which means most blind bid situations are not going to qualify. Okay. Now, you may have a part of your business that the only way to do business is blind bids, in which case, knock yourself out. Just make sure that you know what you're doing. So most aren't going to qualify. Of those that do qualify, most won't accept an invitation. In other words, they aren't set up for further engagement. And remember, you have zero chance of negotiating unless you can bypass the specifier and get to an economic buyer. So blind bids probably won't make it through your filter, and it's better off for you to find opportunities that are you're more qualified for, where you have more engagement from the customer. If you do a proposal, this is the ones you spend the least amount of time on. You provide minimal details, throw in the marketing propaganda, and hope for the best. If I choose to respond to a blind bid, I'll very often do a 1-page proposal and then send a bunch of marketing propaganda and hope I get somebody's attention. Now, very often in a blind bid situation that you've decided that you just have to have this, or even in a courtesy bid, if you can't get the client to engage and you feel like this is strategically really important for you, here's what you do. You can either not bid and work on the invitation, get them to know you before the next project that I talked about earlier. You can bid, but just change the scope. Look at the scope, say this is not the right way to do it. Write something completely different and treat it as a scope test. Maybe you'll get somebody's attention. Maybe they'll question the validity of their approach and engage you. Or you can bid the exact scope, but treat it as a pricing test and put terms in there that say, we will not do the job per your scope of work, but here's what that job is worth. We welcome an opportunity to talk about the job that you actually need. Do something to get someone's attention. Okay, so drastic measures, but sometimes they come up. So, summary. Well, the summary, I just went over the summary. We have to qualify, we have to position, we have to close. We run every opportunity through the same process. There's 4 different types of bids. You need to identify the type of proposal that you're dealing with, the type of RFP you're dealing with, okay, and apply the process accordingly. Ask yourselves, slow down your selling process. Create checkpoints where you discuss qualification. Create another checkpoint where you discuss how you're going to position yourself. Create another checkpoint to make sure that you're putting the right proposal in front of the customer. Slow down the process, you'll have more success. Now, I like to leave you with some discussion points because a bunch of you are sitting in rooms together, and I think that's great. And here's a couple of ideas. I want you to think of 2 or 3 recent opportunities that you've had and discuss what kind of RFP you were dealing with and how you might have handled it differently. Maybe it's a job that you felt like you didn't get the margin you needed, or a job where you didn't get any headway at all. Talk about them. Think what you would have done differently using qualified position and close if you understood what the RFP was about. Talk about invitations. I mean, these are a new concept for most of you. Discuss the different types of invitations that could be at your disposal, because you need to create these tools so that your sales team can use them. What do you need to be ready to do? What kind of options do you need to have a quick meeting? Now think about some longtime customers, okay? Do you have some longtime customers that have changed their RFP approach? Has something happened in their organization? And have you changed how you respond? You probably have an example in this past year of a customer that's changed the way that they're bringing you new business. All right, let me slip in a shameless plug here while you're formulating some questions, because we've come to the end of another webinar. And I see we've got a couple of questions coming up, so I'm looking forward to answering those. Shameless plugs about what I do. I do workshops. I've got all these videos online, lots of free stuff for you to take a look at that you can help your business with. So I hope you become more engaged with Stimson Group and av-matters.com, because there's a lot of good information out there to help you do your business. This webinar will be archived. If you go to av-matters.com, under webinars, it says view past webinars. You will need to create a login if you haven't done that already, which will reaffirm your AV Matters subscription. It doesn't cost anything, and I'm not going to hit you with any more emails than I hit you with now, but that'll give you access to exclusive content that non-subscribers don't have access to. Now, I want to thank again our sponsor, Tony Nasca at DoveNet, and the project system, and I look forward to working with other sponsors in the future. Thank them for making these webinars possible. So let's get on to these questions in the little bit of time left. All right. Question here, it says, I spend months begging for an RFP and they send me one 90 days before the event with no time to meet in person. Is this a courtesy bid in all cases? No, actually, this is not a courtesy bid necessarily. It might be. What makes you think 90 days isn't enough time to extend an invitation and have a deeper conversation with the customer? Timelines are getting shorter and shorter. We need to change our perception of what a short timeline actually is. I'm thinking, a lot of guys on this call are thinking, man, 90 days, I'd kill for 90 days of lead time. Okay? You'd be amazed at what customers would be willing to do to get the right supplier on there. So don't let 90 days or even 45 days deter you. Question here, is a conference call considered a human engagement? In other words, I guess what we're asking, is this appropriate for a positioning conversation? It is barely adequate. Matter of fact, it's probably the weakest response you can have. So yeah, that may be all we get sometimes. If you can do a conference call, then you can do a web conference. So do the web conference. Use a GoToMeeting or WebEx and put some material in front of the client. Or at the very least, be prepared to have them reference a bunch of things that you're sending them their way, looking at videos and images and whatnot. Okay, another good question here. Could you talk about how to qualify, position, and close when responding through an online bid platform like Ariba? Okay, so Ariba is a blind bid situation. It's one of many services out there that corporations are using to get access to more suppliers to get better pricing. Okay? It's very difficult to get engagement in that environment. So we're automatically in the blind bid category, and you can send requests for information and suggestions and ideas. At the end of the day, if you want to engage with Ariba, you're probably going to have to take one of those last-ditch effort techniques that I described that says, this is a totally inappropriate request, here's what you should have asked for, and here's how we would do it. And I will tell you that I myself have done this as a consultant. There's actually consultant websites like Ariba, like guru.com. And I actually got a pretty substantial piece of business from a city that had a $12,000 budget for a business plan. And I ended up billing $24,000 for it because I responded to their RFP by telling them it didn't work. And I was very compelling. And so they engaged and they bought a more expensive project, and then they did add-ons after that. So Ariba is a great way to find some opportunities, but I bet there's some better opportunities out there for you. So good question. Are there still AV companies who think revenue is still king? Hey, that's a great bar question. Somebody buy me a drink. But yeah, there's a lot of people who still think revenue is what's important. What are your thoughts on consultant-controlled blind bids where you are one of a few invitees? So consultant, so if you're doing consultant work, bid build kind of work, the consultant now becomes your channel, becomes your access to that potential end client. The qualified position and close still works. Okay, I'm going to have a qualifying conversation with the consultant, and one of the things I'm qualifying with is, can I get him to better understand why I am qualified to be on his bid list, and expand that conversation a little bit. And in fact, design consultants, that's part of their business model as I understand it. They are looking for a higher level of engagement from potential supply chain partners in the deal. So they need you to be better. So if you're trying to be better, they're probably going to help you. So yes, I would treat that. I would go for the positioning conversation, and that might actually include bringing in either the economic buyer or the most likely user, as it may be, whoever the design consultant is working with. So great question. What if it is a government bid? Does this change your approach? Government bids, there's a couple types here. One, they're kind of a blind bid, and two, if you have a government contract with a fixed price, the services organization, GSA pricing, sometimes it is a blind bid. However, I do have several clients that work in GSA in both integration and rental and staging. And because so few companies want to mess with GSA, they actually have trouble getting responses sometimes. So a government quote might be a great opportunity. If you're working on, a city or a municipality or some other agency within governments on a more local basis, and they have a very arm's length approach, it's really a procurement situation. So I treat it very much like I would treat a corporate procurement opportunity. Is I want to try and create some engagement and make myself more qualified than the other people that they're asking to bid. So typically, if there's 10 companies on a government bid list for a project, 8 of them, I think we could all agree, probably weren't qualified in the first place. And if nobody tries harder, one of those 8 is probably going to end up getting the job. And we certainly don't want that. So these are great questions. I see more questions coming in. I'm going to answer all of these in writing, and these will be posted along with the archive of this webinar, and you should have access to those by Monday. I'll send you an email about it, but you'll also just see that it's going to be on the past webinars on avmatters.com. So thank you everyone for your participation. I hope you have fun with it. If you got some more questions, just email them to me. I'm happy to answer them. Happy Friday, have a great weekend, and if I don't see you, Merry Christmas.